Impeachment trial. The U.S. Senate begins proceedings in the case against President Donald Trump. We have team coverage. World Economic Forum. Top business and political leaders are meeting this week in Switzerland. We talk with a Catholic priest attending the gathering. Fight for the Unborn. Final preparations are underway for the March for Life in Washington, D.C. And Finding Freedom. Pope Francis says why it's so important to trust God. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 21st, 2020.
It's an act of patriotism to defend the constitutional rights of the president, because if they can do it to the president, they could do it to any of you, and they could do it to any American citizen, and that's wrong.
In the first day of Senate impeachment trial proceedings, the president's lead lawyer says the two charges against President Donald Trump don't amount to impeachable offenses and the president committed no crime. A partisan fight unfolds on Capitol Hill even before impeachment proceedings began. Senate Democrats object strongly to rules proposed by the Republican leader, rules calling for a speedy trial. Catholic news agency's Matt Hadro reports now from Capitol Hill. Matt?
Good evening, Tracy. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell just last night released a resolution calling for a very speedy trial. He did relax the regulations somewhat today, allowing for 3 days instead of just 2 days for each side to make opening arguments in the trial. Senate Democrats are still accusing Republicans of obscuring the truth.
Cover up.
Senate Democrats unite in their criticism of the Republican leader's plans for the impeachment proceedings.
And now they will seek to straitjacket the trial in terms of witnesses and documents. They have essentially rigged this resolution to favor the president, to shortcut all of the due process that both sides deserve.
They say the prospect of middle-of-the-night proceedings, without allowing new witnesses or even the pages and pages of House records of the trial, omits crucial information. The House managers who led the impeachment efforts spoke harsh words for the proposal.
To be debating whether you should have the evidence admitted, to be debating whether you should allow witnesses, is to be debating whether you should have a cover-up by definition.
And Minority Leader Schumer announced this morning he will press for the White House to produce documents.
The first amendment I will offer will ask that the Senate subpoena White House documents related to the charges against the president.
But Schumer's effort faced immediate pushback from Majority Leader McConnell.
If any amendments are brought forward to force premature decisions on mid-trial questions, I will move to table such amendments.
House Trial Manager Adam Schiff said today that the most important job of senators is to give President Trump a fair trial. GOP Senator John Kennedy tells us that, in his opinion, the House impeachment proceedings were rigged, but that the upcoming Senate trial will be fair to both sides. Tracy?
Catholic news agency's Matt Hadro reporting for us tonight from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Matt. President Trump speaks out overseas about the start of his impeachment trial back in Washington. At the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, President Trump called the trial a hoax. White House correspondent Mark Irons joins us now. Mark?
Tracy, the president is doing double duty today in Davos, Switzerland, meeting with world leaders while also weighing in on the history in the making here in Washington.
Upon landing in Switzerland, President Trump voiced a familiar message about impeachment proceedings in Washington.
That whole thing is a hoax. It goes nowhere because nothing happened. The only thing we've done is a great job. We have the strongest country in the world by far.
Today, he gave his keynote speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, speaking about U.S. economic success.
We've regained our stride, rediscovered our spirit, and reawakened the powerful machinery of American enterprise.
And meeting with world leaders gathered at the summit, President Trump spoke about improving international trade relationships and cost sharing in NATO.
We've been treated very badly as a country for many, many years on trade. And of course, NATO also, if you look at what happens with NATO, we're spending a vast predominance of the money.
White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham said President Trump would have a full day in Davos, but would be briefed periodically on the Senate impeachment trial. This week, the White House released its own trial memorandum summarizing its view of impeachment, writing, House Democrats were determined from the outset to find some way, any way, to corrupt the extraordinary power of impeachment for use as a political tool to overturn the result of the 2016 election and to interfere in the 2020 election.
Impeachment continues to be on the president's mind in Davos, referring to the phone calls that he had with the president of Ukraine that started this whole controversy. President Trump thinks that those transcripts actually clear his name. Today he tweeted a phrase he's often used, saying, read the transcripts. Tracy.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. And with more on the impeachment and his analysis, we are joined now by Giancarlo Canapero. He is a legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Giancarlo, welcome back. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. Well, the partisan fighting continues. We know that Democrats are opposed to rules proposed by Republican leader Mitch McConnell, saying the process is not one for a fair trial. What do you think about that?
That statement is just fundamentally untrue. The rules that McConnell introduced this morning, slightly amended from the ones that we saw earlier, substantially track those rules used in the Clinton impeachment proceedings. And as you probably remember, those were passed 100-0 in the Senate, perfectly unanimous. These proceedings, or these rules that McConnell has introduced, track those substantially. They are a fundamentally fair process, one which is designed to not repeat the mistakes that we saw in the House, which was one of the fastest, most partisan, and most thinly evidenced impeachment proceedings that the House has ever conducted.
It seems that witness testimony is still a sticking point. Do you think there's any value or importance to it?
Look, the House, the way that impeachment works is the House has an obligation to build its case, to set out its case, to gather the evidence. That's what the House does. If the Democrats now are complaining that they don't have the evidence they need to conduct a complete trial, the trial that they want to conduct, that's on them. There were a lot of witnesses that they could have called in the House that they chose not to call. There were witnesses that were objected to by the president on privilege grounds. The Democrats had every right to challenge those in court. They decided not to. In short, they got the evidence that they wanted in their compressed time frame. They could have drawn this out. They could have really gone and done the deep dive that they should have done. That was done during the Clinton impeachment proceedings, but they didn't. And if they're upset about that, the only people Democrats have to blame are Democrats in the House themselves.
Chief Justice John Roberts is presiding over the trial, of course, along with juggling his Supreme Court duties. What's the balance that he needs to strike during these impeachment proceedings?
To quote Justice Rehnquist, when he sat in the Clinton impeachment, he said, I did nothing in particular and I did it very well. The Chief Justice's role here is essentially one of a figurehead. He's basically standing in as the president of the Senate because, of course, the vice president is the president of the Senate, and the founding fathers thought that it would be unseemly to have the man who might become the president preside over the impeachment trial of the other. So really his role is largely as a figurehead. The senators themselves are both the judges and juries through this process. So really, hopefully his official function to the Supreme Court should not really be too badly impeded.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks
My
for your
pleasure.
analysis. We appreciate it. Giancarlo Canapero, legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much for your insight.
Thanks for having me.
Officials in China are trying to control the outbreak of a new virus, and anxiety is growing both at home and abroad.
So far, 4 cases have been reported outside China, 2 in Thailand, 1 in Japan, and 1 in the Republic of Korea. This is what we have been informing you about previously. More cases should be expected in other parts of China and possibly other countries.
The World Health Organization says that it will meet tomorrow to decide if the situation is of international concern. Chinese officials say the virus can be transmitted from person to person. Streets are being disinfected and people are wearing masks in an effort to remain safe. The religious congregation of the Legion of Christ has announced a probe into a possible cover-up regarding a priest accused of sexual abuse. The Institute announced the investigation yesterday, which will be conducted jointly with the Vatican. The priest sexually abused girls as young as age 6, but suffered no punishment. One of the victims is now a Mexican television host and mother of 3. 10 years ago, the Holy See mandated reform of the order after finding its founder was guilty of sexual abuse. Pope Francis will meet next month with Mediterranean bishops in the city of Bari, Italy. The gathering includes more than 50 bishops from nations in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. It will be called Mediterranean Peace Frontier and will focus on migration and the evangelization of young people. The World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland is hosting 3,000 dignitaries and business leaders, including, as mentioned earlier, President Donald Trump. The forum is celebrating 50 years. The theme this year is focused on stakeholders for a cohesive and sustainable world. Pope Francis sent a message for this annual meeting. Cardinal Peter Turkson read the Holy Father's greeting, where he reminded business leaders of the high moral responsibility that each one has to seek the integral development of all. He advised to give full consideration to the ethical dimension in seeking resolutions rather than the mere pursuit of power or profit. Father Philip Larrey, chair of logic and epistemology at the Pontifical Lateran University, was invited to the forum by the United Arab Emirates AI Everything Summit to speak about the Christian perspective on artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution. He joins us now from Rome. Father, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being back to EWTN.
Well, as the priest attending the World Economic Forum, what will you be sharing with the world's greatest business and technology leaders?
I'm trying to share the Christian perspective on these issues. I think that it's interesting that the promoters of the forum actually are inviting more dialogue on issues referring to the faith, and not only the Christian faith, but also the Jewish and the Muslim faith as well. What I'm trying to bring is a desire, which Pope Francis has expressed every year. He sends a greeting to the forum, a desire to keep emerging technologies centered on the human being. So people-focused technology, and especially artificial intelligence, should be what we are all developing so that we can make sure that these technologies end up doing good and not doing evil.
Well, the fourth industrial revolution is described as merging the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds in ways that create both huge promise and potential peril. Can you explain this revolution and maybe what the dangers are?
Some of it is a lot of hype, but other aspects I think are very realistic. And what we're doing is incorporating digital technologies in our daily life. So we have wearable technology, we have Fitbit, which monitors our heartbeat and different aspects of the human body. And we're going to see, I think, technology become more and more an integral part of us. When that happens, or as it's happening, it can be very useful, but it also, I think, has to be used with prudence and with caution.
And we know that you're leaving for Rome tomorrow to attend the forum. What are you expecting from these meetings, and what are you hoping to see?
These meetings sometimes are a bit of a formality, but other times you encounter, or we encounter, people who are authentically interested in promoting human dignity in the business world or in the tech industry. Obviously the people that you meet at Davos are somewhat elite. Obviously that's what the forum caters to, and it's a special moment when they're actually open to listening to what we have to say. What we have to say, I'm referring to the Catholic perspective, especially from the Vatican and from the Holy Father. And I have found in general that people are a little bit shocked to see a Catholic priest. Some people come up to me and they say, "Oh, Father, thank you so much for coming. This is a place that doesn't usually invite a lot of priests, but I'm a Catholic and I'm glad that you're here." And so we have different meetings and different lunches with people that are, I think, sincerely open to dialogue and in hearing what we have to say. Now, let's not be too idealistic and say that we're going to change the world by attending Davos. I think it's just another aspect where we can make our voice heard.
Absolutely. Well, Father, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Good luck in Davos. And Godspeed, Father Philip Larrey. He is the chair of logic and epistemology at the Pontifical Lateran University. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Coming up, Planned Parenthood announces which candidate it's backing in a Senate race in Maine. And a preview of this Friday's March for Life in Washington, D.C.
Planned Planned Parenthood says it's backing Democrat Sarah Gideon in a Senate race in Maine. The nation's largest abortion provider says Republican Susan Collins turned her back on women by supporting Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. Collins was honored by Planned Parenthood as recently as 2017. She was called an outspoken champion for women's health. Final preparations are underway for this year's March for Life in Washington, D.C., which brings together pro-life advocates from across the United States. The annual march, held in the nation's capital, marks the anniversary of the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling, which legalized abortion in all 50 states. Joining me now with a preview of this year's march is Jeanne Mancini. She is president of the March for Life. Jeanne, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Yeah, so this year's theme is Life Empowers, Pro-Life is Pro-Woman. How do pro-life and pro-woman go hand in hand?
Well, this year, 2020, marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which of course is a woman's right to vote. And so we're going back to the early suffragists to discover how all of them were essentially pro-life, and they did not see, a woman's capacity for motherhood as being at odds with her inherent dignity of being a woman. So we're studying that. But then also this year, there's going to be so much negative messaging about what it means to be pro-woman, especially in an election year. And so we want to do our part to provide clarity on what that means. So, I mean, life is empowering, and being pro-life is pro-woman.
Wonderful. Let's talk about the March for Life. In the past, it's attracted thousands of people in Washington. What's the response been like so far this year, and how many people are you expecting?
Well, I've been amazed. So I've been working at the March for a little over 7 years. So this will actually be my 8th March, and every year it seems to grow. And we have well over 100,000 that come. So largely young people. This is an organically grassroots organization and event, and you'll see just those smiling, happy young people, well over 100,000. So the excitement this year is there. It's palpable again.
And I know you guys are going to have a host of inspiring speakers, and there's going to be politicians there and pro-life leaders as well as abortion survivors. But it's also a somber reminder of the lives lost.
Yeah, Tracy, thanks for asking that. There's always a tension in the event because we're commemorating the loss of 61 million Americans to abortion, and that we live in a culture of walking wounded, men and women who've been wounded by abortion. And there's always hope and healing for someone who's having that experience. And yet we've got, the excitement of knowing that this is the human rights abuse of today that we're fighting for and fighting against, and that we will bring an end to this. We will make abortion unthinkable.
And this year you've also launched a number of pro-life marches in different cities across the country. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, for a whole host of reasons. We were thinking and praying about this for a number of years, but essentially we're asked more than any other question if we can help start local marches, and so much is happening legislatively at the state level. So this year we'll have our 2nd annual Virginia March for Life in Richmond on February 13th. We're also going to have a Connecticut March on April 15th and a Pennsylvania March on May 18th.
Great. And how's the response been as far as attendance?
It's so exciting. So in Virginia, we had over 7,000 people come to the Virginia March last year, and they say that was the largest event short of an inauguration, a gubernatorial inauguration on the grounds of the Capitol in Richmond. So very exciting at that state level.
Wonderful. One last question quickly, if we can get this in. What's your advice to help pro-lifers maintain the momentum beyond this week, especially in the face of pro-abortion messaging?
Yeah, well, if people come to the March for Life and they're motivated and have a great day, that's wonderful. But if their hearts aren't changed so that they go home to their local community to make a difference, then we haven't done our job. So, I mean, the real goal here is for each of us to embrace our mission and our vocation to help build a culture of life. And for each of us, that's a little bit differently, but that's our real hope and goal, to make abortion unthinkable.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeanne, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Jeanne Mancini, president of the March for Life. Thank you. Our Catholic bishops in the United States say the country is still painfully far from being the land Martin Luther King Jr. had hoped it would be. In a statement released late last week, Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, said in part, quote, "Racism is a sin that denies the truth about God and his creation, and it is a scandal that disfigures the beauty of America's founding vision." Yesterday, the nation honored the civil rights leader who was killed back in 1968 at the age of 39. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the head of the Archdiocese of New York, is conducting an investigation into a bishop from Brooklyn. The accusation against Bishop Nicholas DiMaurizio dates back from his time as a priest in the Archdiocese of Newark. The probe is part of the church law issued by Pope Francis last year on dealing with claims of misconduct against a bishop.
Up next, Pope Francis tells the faithful one way to be a good follower of Christ. And a museum in the nation's capital is set to open an exhibit on one of the most studied objects in human history.
Delle influenze per diventare qui, là, ma gli arrampicatori, no?
Pope Francis tells the faithful they can find freedom by trusting in God. At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says being a good Christian means listening to what the Lord says about charity and forgiveness. He also says those who put their own demands above God's will are guilty of idolatry. The Holy Feast of Manopella, which is believed to be the Veil of Veronica, was celebrated this past Sunday.
For me, a very beautiful space here in Manopello, because we as Christians believe in God not in an abstract way, but in a very concrete way. We know God had shown his face in his Son, Jesus Christ.
Cardinal Kurt Koch, president of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, celebrated Mass in the small Italian village at the Shrine of the Holy Face. He concluded with a procession of the Holy Image to mark the feast of the Omnis Terra, which was established by the Vatican in the year 1208. Pope Francis also acknowledged the feast by inviting faithful to contemplate an icon of the Holy Face of Christ, not only with our eyes, but also with our hearts. The Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. is preparing an exhibit of one of the most beloved and studied objects in human history, the Shroud of Turin. The cloth has remained an image of a man believed to be the burial cloth that wrapped the body of Jesus after his death on the cross.
It is the single most studied artifact in all of history. There is no other object known to exist that more academic scrutiny has been brought to bear on than this cloth.
Long revered as the burial cloth of Jesus, the shroud is ranked among the greatest objects connected to the Passion. The actual cloth is kept in the Italian city of Turin. It has provoked intense scientific, historical, and theological interest. All three fields were heard Saturday at the Museum of the Bible. The Explore the Mystery Shroud of Turin event brought some of the world's leading shroud experts together.
The mystery in it, of course, is as much about the man that's represented in that perfect icon as it is about the image formation, its journey through history, the millions of people throughout history that have venerated this cloth. So it's religious, it's cultural, it's social, and it's profoundly personal all at the same time.
Among the experts who spoke was EWTN's own father, Robert Spitzer.
The image is an extremely precise photographic negative image that's on a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth.
The host of Father Spitzer's Universe with Doug Keck on EWTN reflected on the importance of the shroud for both faith and reason.
Right now, of course, the Catholic Church has taken no position on authenticity up to this point, and with wisely so, because there's a lot of investigation that has to be done. However, the evidence now, not only for the crucifixion, especially the gospel accounts of the crucifixion emblazoned on the shroud, is absolutely remarkable.
The famed object has, for centuries, been the source of spiritual inspiration to countless people.
One of the things we'll do in the exhibit is to highlight the gospel stories and show how the shroud reflects that and how it's depicted in the cloth, reflected in the cloth. It really just gives us a great opportunity to allow people who might just have a surface knowledge to want to come and dig deeper.
Father Andrew Dalton teaches about the shroud at the Pontifical Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum in Rome. He told us about the shroud's possible spiritual value.
From there, it's just been it's the great mystery story of our time. What made the image? Nobody can answer this question to date. And so I think that's why the scientists want to ask the mystery, what formed the image? Whereas men and women of faith are asking, what does this reveal about the sufferings of Christ?
The Museum of the Bible is planning a major exhibit about the Shroud, expected to open February 2021. And finally tonight, today is the feast of Saint Agnes. The 4th century saint was just around 12 years old when she was killed for her love of Christ. She is the patron saint of young women, brides, and purity. In Latin, her name Agnes means lamb, which is why she is often depicted with that animal. Saint Agnes, pray for us. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.